In this lesson, you will learn what responsive design is and how to build websites that work great on any screen size. But first, what is responsive design? The websites you create will be viewed on smartphones, tablets, laptops, computers, and ultra-wide displays. We need our designs to adapt to the available space by expanding and reordering content. This is what we call responsive web design. To begin, open the example design file that's included in the video description. Then drop the image on the stage. When you resize, you can see that it expands to fit the screen. This is thanks to the responsive option. If we switch it off, you can see that the image is wider than the screen and overflows the page. This leads to a horizontal scroll bar. If you open it on a phone, you will have to scroll left and right to see everything, which is a poor experience. So the main takeaway is if you see a horizontal scroll bar, this means that your page is not responsive. Overflowing content often results if you set a width to an element. For example, let's drop a paragraph and insert some dummy text. You can see that the text breaks up into multiple lines. But say you wish to limit how wide the text is to make it more readable. If you just go ahead and give it a width, you've broken responsiveness again, and small devices will scroll horizontally. This is why setting a width in pixels is generally a bad idea. The way to limit an element's width without breaking responsiveness is by using max width. So now the paragraph will not exceed 500 pixels, but will still shrink on smaller devices. You can even center it on the screen by setting margin left and margin right to the auto value. Resizing the page shows how the paragraph adapts to the width. Another way responsiveness can break is if you enable the no wrap option on long paragraphs. This forces the text on a single line, overflows the page, and causes a scroll bar. No wrap is intended for short text elements, which will fit even on the smallest device. For elements with a lot of text, you can activate truncate. This will cut off the overflowing content, and no scroll bars will result. There is another way to prevent overflows. You should consider this a nuclear option that you leave as a last resort. Select the HTML component and in Display and Sizing, set Overflow to Hidden. This will hide any overflowing content, but will also eliminate the vertical scroll bar, which will prevent the page from scrolling and will make your site unusable. As a solution, you can hide overflows only in the horizontal direction like this. Now, even though the text is overflowing, the page is not showing a scroll bar. This is not much of a fix though, since there is no way to see the rest of the text. You've only masked the problem. Overall, this is a poor way of fixing responsive issues, but at least you know how to hide the scroll bars now. Now, let's turn our attention to the container component. This is the basis of every responsive design in Bootstrap Studio. It helps you limit the width of your website in fixed increments. It also prevents the content from getting too wide on the largest screen sizes. You can change this behavior by activating the fluid option. This will make the container always take the entire width of the page. The full width option is a middle ground. It tells the container to be fluid until a specific breakpoint. There is no hard rule on how to use containers in your design. Some people prefer to have a single container wrap their entire website. Others like to structure their pages in multiple sections, each with its own container. The only limitation with containers is that you can't place them within each other. If you try, the app will show a red border. With this, we're ready to move on to the most important components for building responsive websites. These are row and column. Together, they are the basic building blocks of the responsive Bootstrap grid. To use them, take a row and drop it inside a container. rows always need to live inside containers. This is because for alignment, rows have negative left and right margins, which containers compensate with padding. I have included a link to Bootstrap's documentation if you wish to learn more. To give you maximum flexibility, Bootstrap Studio won't stop you if you try to place a row outside a container. But due to the negative margins, the row will overflow the body, causing a horizontal scroll bar. Now let's drop a column inside our row and duplicate it. This gives us two equally sized columns to play with. Drop an image in the first and a paragraph in the second. You can see that the app shows the outlines of columns as pink lines. This is only a visual aid and won't be visible in the browser after you export or preview. You can switch off this visualization from the View Options menu. Right now our columns are equally sized and always take half the width of the row. Let's make them align vertically on small devices. We can do this in two ways. The first is from the options of the row, the second is from the columns themselves. We'll try both. Select the row. It has a few options that control the grid. You can do things like removing the spacing between columns, aligning them, and choosing how many to show per row. You can see that most of the options can be expanded, and they can have different values on each breakpoint. This is a powerful tool for building responsive layouts. The blue dot indicates which breakpoint is currently active. Resizing the canvas updates it. When you set a value, it applies to all screen sizes equal or larger than the breakpoint. For example, this is the base value. It applies to all breakpoints if they don't have their own value. If I set per row to 1, this will show 1 column per line on all screen sizes. If I set it to 2 on the MD breakpoint and resize, you can see that the columns are still 1 per line on small screens, but switch to 2 on MD and up. The per row setting is great when you need columns of equal size, but if you need one to be larger than the other, you will have to set the widths on each column individually. We will cover this in a bit. The other useful settings here have to do with column alignment. Align columns Y lets you align vertically. Align columns X horizontally. To demonstrate horizontal centering, we first have to leave some empty room around the columns. For example, if I set the per row to 3, this will leave room for another column even though we have only 2. Now we can center horizontally. This gives us half a column of free space on either side. The second way of making responsive grid layouts is by editing the columns themselves. Selecting a column gives us a bunch of options for changing its size and position. Each has breakpoint-specific values. The width option is the one you will use most often. The base width is set to the expand value. This will make the column expand to fit the available space. Right now, both of our columns are set to expand, which makes them divide the available space between them, and each ends up with half. The other noteworthy value is auto. This makes the column just wide enough to fit its content, and because the column with the photo is set to expand, it widens to take up the available space. You can set the width to a specific value, from 1 to 12 units. A 6 would mean that the column takes half the width of the row, and a 12 would mean the column takes the entire width. A row can fit only 12 units on the same line. Everything more will push columns on multiple lines. So for example, if I set this column to 4 and the first column to 6, this will give us 10 total units and leave us room to spare. If I set the first column to 8, the columns will total 12 units and take up the entire row. Everything more will push the second column on the next line. To achieve the layout we made earlier, set the width to 12 and 6 on the MD breakpoint. Copy and paste the options to the second column. Now, when we resize, you can see the layout transitioning like last time. Another option you can find here is Offset. This allows you to leave blank space before a column. If I set the width to 4, this will give me 2 units to assign as an offset. Margin Auto is another way to achieve this. You can set it to start. This will give the column a push to the right side. Horizontal will leave blank space on either side. All will center it vertically as well. The vertical align setting gives you even more control. You can push the column to the top, bottom, or center. And lastly, we have the order setting. It allows you to rearrange the columns depending on screen size. Let's go back to the initial state. Another way you can resize columns in Bootstrap Studio is by using the resize handle in the bottom right corner like this. When you release, the app updates the active breakpoint with the width you've set. Shrink the canvas to the smallest size and resize the column to take the full width. This will edit the base value in the options. Our grid transitions from 1 to 2 columns, just like before. Once you get the hang of it, this can be a very quick way to build responsive layouts. When working with the grid, you often need to insert extra columns. There are a few ways to do this. You can duplicate an existing column like this. You can use the toolbar to insert columns before or after the current one, or at the end of the row. You can drag and drop additional columns like this. And you can drop any component directly in the row. This will wrap it in a new column automatically. This is a good opportunity to introduce the column helper component. It's an alternative way to make responsive grids. You drop it between columns like this, and it will break them up into 2 lines. If you wish the line break to activate only on small devices, use the Display and Sizing group. Set the MD value to None to hide the component on large screens. This will show the columns on a single line again. You now know enough to make full use of the Bootstrap grid. As an exercise, you can try recreating some of the components in the UI group. Each is built using the same containers, rows, and columns that you learned about. They are a good opportunity to see how everything fits together. For the next part of this lesson, we will take a look at the margin and padding resize tool and how we can make it responsive. Switch to the Spacing HTML page in the example design. Here we have these 2 paragraphs. As you learned in a previous video, we can increase the padding, which is the space within the element's borders, and the margin, which is the space between elements. However, on small screens, this is too much. We need a way to set spacing relative to screen size. This is where the breakpoint dropdown comes in. You can see each breakpoint, and the active one is marked with a blue indicator. Breakpoints which have values are shown in blue. To improve the spacing, we will start from the smallest size and work upwards. We will decrease it on the base breakpoint. Then we'll increase it a bit on the SM size. And finally, on the LG size. Now the spacing of the paragraphs adapts to the device size. You can see how the spacing works by opening the editor panel. This class gives the paragraph a gray background color. These classes are Bootstrap's responsive utilities, and they make the margin and padding work. Each declares the type of property, the breakpoint, and the size. You can click it to see the relevant option that controls it in the sidebar. The margin and padding resize tool modifies these values for you. but you can set them here as well. Another way to make designs responsive is with CSS. You can see it working for Bootstrap's utility classes. Each of these classes is limited with a min-width media query. This restricts the block only to devices that are this many pixels or wider. If the canvas is smaller, the blocks disappear. You can add a media query to your own blocks as well. First, we give the element an ID, then create a CSS block. It will make the text green. Now duplicate the block and make the color blue. To make this apply only on larger breakpoints, we will add a media query. First, resize the canvas to the size you wish the media query to activate. I will choose the SM breakpoint. Now click the Add Media Query option in the menu. This will create the appropriate min width that matches the current breakpoint. You can also edit the query to any value you like. Now the color transitions between green and blue depending on the screen size. We will cover more in our CSS lesson later in the series. The final technique we will show in this video involves the Appearance panel. In the previous lessons, you learned how to use it to customize your design. And now that you know what a media query is, you are ready to learn that the Appearance panel supports them as well. This makes it easy to visually edit your components relative to screen size. Let's see how we can give the second paragraph the same color transition by using the Appearance panel. I will create a new block and give it an ID of green-blue 2 and set the color to green. For the transition, create another block. The ID is filled in automatically. Choose Media and pick the SM breakpoint in the list. This creates the new block with a media query badge with the minimum width. Now we set the color to blue. You can see that this created the same CSS as before. Clicking the file name will reveal all blocks that we created so far. And resizing the canvas shows that both paragraphs transition from green to blue the same way. Thank you for watching our responsive design lesson. Check out our other videos to learn more about Bootstrap Studio.